concerned about the architectural integrity of the building, then why should it make any difference whether it's in the touch zone, the second floor, or the back of the building where you can't see it? You know, on the other hand, if we're concerned about character,
then you're in Disney World.
Then you're in Disney World. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I tend to be a purist. I tend not to be a purist on the issue. I tend to believe that there are truly historic properties, which I put into one category, and there are contributing properties. You know, we've had people come in and talk to us who say, hey, you know, they're putting these composite windows into Monticello and Mount Vernon and places like that, and yet we're not letting them put them into a house in Harrisburg. So, you know, we struggle with this all the time. I tend to think that it should be, for most of us, more about the character, the overall character of the neighborhood, unless you have a place where George Washington actually slept. You know, something like that. I tend to think that lots of people are neglecting properties and allowing properties to decay to the point where they either walk away from them or just because they don't want to invest the dollars that are necessary, not just in the repair work, but in the maintenance that's required when you require wood product. You know, and the problem with even with wood these days is that wood isn't the wood it was 50 years ago. You know, wood isn't the same quality as it was. It warps quicker, it cracks quicker, so there's lots of issues involved there. We try to follow the national standards as closely as possible, but we are slowly taking steps into allowing composite materials as long as they can be painted. We're dealing now with lots of people wanting to put up solar panels on rooftops and stuff like that. So I think it's one of those things, and to be quite honest with you, we're going to have to sit down and have a national conversation about these issues. Because there's even a conversation I read recently about people saying, you know, the long-held kind of standard that if it's new construction, it should not necessarily try to mimic what's already there and make it look like it's part of the history. Now they're starting to change that. There's conversation out there about, is that the right thing to do?
Are these national park standards you're talking about?
Yeah. Well,
Secretary of Interior.
Secretary of the Interior standards, the preservation briefs, all those sorts of things. Yeah. Now, I think the responsibility where you have a historic district in place, that's part of the responsibility of that board, of that HARB, is to take those standards and interpret them as best they can for the local. So you do see lots of things that happen where local decisions are made that aren't always in conformance with the standards.
I've pretty much devoted my life to the minority opinion, which would be that traditional building has a lot more longevity than the capitalistic products that we receive these days. So if you're replacing architectural details with integrity, true divided light, mortise and tenon construction, sash and windows that are 150 years old with windows that are only going to last for 10 years, I think you need to look at that. That's really pretty short-term thinking. And what it does do, though, is it fuels the economy, and it allows people to say that they're selling things like green building and energy efficiency, which is basically an advertising gimmick.
Right.
It lacks credibility, and yet the majority of people won't even question it. No. And, so, for my opinion, I can't believe that we would want to give up the good fight.
Right. Well, let me ask you a question then, because this is the conversation we have all the time, and I agree that vinyl, you know, we wouldn't allow. Well, in Harrisburg, the enabling legislation for the HARB says if you can't see it, we don't have jurisdiction over it. So if we can't see it, somebody wants to put vinyl windows in the back of the house, they can do that. But have you, assuming that all the things you talked about were being done, but it was composite wood resin mix?
Glue.
What's your sense about? I see where you're going with it. Yeah. Yeah.
The longevity of a product like that is often less than 10 years.
Yeah.
There was a lot
Especially
of,
if it's in a moist environment.
I was going to say, there was a lot of litigation over the composite decks when they first came out
Yeah.
because they were just peeling. So I don't know, to be an early adopter, I wouldn't recommend that.
Well, we've done it a couple of places as test cases. We said, we'll put them in, and we want to kind of see how they work and what happens. We've had a couple of people who've had some very kind of difficult architectural detailing that they've had to do, and they have asked to use composite materials in places like that. So we'll see what happens. We're still kind of dipping our toe in the water.
Is it more composite or like the Ficon and like the...
Yeah, AZEC and
See, that's
those
different
kinds
than
of things.
composite.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that it was a
PVC,
vocabulary.
Yeah.
PVC has proven it has a track record of longevity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are two issues here. One, a lot of the materials that were built into colonial buildings
Right.
are no longer available.
Right.
For example, the shingles were often cedar that was mined.
Right.
And these were logs that had fallen in the swamp hundreds of years before. The materials no longer available.
Right.
The other thing, when the buildings were built, they were built for the environment that was present at the time. There wasn't any air conditioning. There weren't showers and bathtubs in the house.
Acid raining.
Didn't have all the humidity in interior.
Right.
And now you have some problems that didn't exist 200 years ago.
Right.
So you've got to...
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult job for anybody involved in historic preservation these days. And the other thing is just the cost. I mean, for lots of people, particularly in the areas where our most historic properties are located, it's a tremendous hardship on them to have to meet historic standards in many cases. Not in every case, but in many cases. And we've certainly had cases where we've had people want to replace standing seam metal roofs with asphalt, and we've said no. Asphalt shingles, and we say no, and we're only advisory. They go to borough council and say, hey, we're too poor to do this. We have water pouring in through the ceiling, and council lets them do it. So I've taken the position that we are better off to try to negotiate an acceptable solution, even if it's not perfect, rather than to have this person go before council and, argue the hardship, and council lets them do whatever they want to do then. Because if we can keep them from doing that, we've hopefully retained some semblance of the historic character. But even in cases, I know there are cases, I've been on house tours in Harrisburg where I know we approved one thing, and you go on the house tour and somebody did completely the opposite of what was approved. We had somebody who wanted to put a deck, they were approved for a wooden deck, I went out and it was all,
Plastic.
yeah, composite. So. Anyway. So I think this whole question, though, is one that's going to have to be debated at the national level, because the other things that are changing are not just the question of materials, but it's also the question of the increasing diversity of the country and how that impacts the question of community revitalization. We were doing some work. We have an Elm Street program over in Reading and Lebanon, and it's a very Hispanic neighborhood where the Elm Street program is going, and contributing properties to a historic district. The historic district is not official, but kind of laid out a long-term plan. And I was surprised when I went there because it's really very attractive. But somebody actually airbrushed a building from like a dark burgundy, into kind of these yellows, and it really looks nice. I mean, you wouldn't think that, but it's kind of this gradation of paint across the building. And yet, for most historic preservations, we go, oh my God, what did they do? Doesn't they paint it over the brick? It's certainly not a traditional historic paint scheme. We've got all these issues around signage, color palettes, all these sorts of issues down the road. I mean, we work in the north, some of the North Philly neighborhoods, and there's a group over there called the Hispanic Association of Contractors and Entrepreneurs, ASE. And, their color palettes for